Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know it's the last class of the day, so I'm hoping to put you on a good trajectory as you go to the bar or whatever it is you got going on. Thanks so much for having me here, John. Thanks for putting on this awesome event. John has been a very good friend and was kind enough to invite me to come here and talk a little bit about our business. And our business is an interesting one, selling airplanes. And while it's interesting and it's cool and it's sexy, we've learned a lot of lessons that I think are applicable not only to all of your businesses, but a lot of your personal lives. And frankly, when it comes down to relationships, those relationships can be cultivated one-on-one. They can be cultivated through your products, through your apps, or whatever it may be. And it's the same. It has nothing to do, no difference if you're selling a jet or if you're selling coffee. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story, about my company story, and how we've progressed and then had some successes and then went backwards and looked at what were the things that we did that worked and how can we continue to elevate it. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are, jetAVIVA. Again, as mentioned by the gentleman that introduced us, we're in the business of selling airplanes. But more than that, I believe I'm in the business of helping making people's dreams come true. And our tagline is my personal ethos. Life is short, fly a jet. But it has nothing to do with just flying a jet. It has to do with your life is short. Do the things you want to do and do them now. Because at someday, you're not going to be able to do them anymore. And this is probably the greatest gift I've gotten out of my business, is realizing the finality of my life. And realizing that going to my grave, not having done the things I wanted to do, would be the biggest possible failure of my life. And I see that in a lot of people that I work with, that they get to a point in their life, they've been working their entire professional career to get to the point where they can own and fly their own jet. And it's a big, big moment of success. A lot of them could have done it a lot sooner. And the biggest regret has been, why didn't I do it sooner? So, about what we do. So we sell primarily small to mid-sized jets, between 6 and 10 passengers, between $2 and $20 million, go between 1,000 and 3,000 nautical mile range. I've been in aviation since I was a little kid. Started when I was 11 years old. Now it's 24 years ago. I started my company with my co-founder 10 years ago.
So what are you doing for audience?
One of my greatest joys is we've got over 2,000 clients in 40 different countries all over the world. I've learned a lot about a lot of different types of people and different cultures and what makes them tick. People don't need what I sell them. They want what I sell them. But it's still a hard sell. I need shoes, I need food, I need coffee to get going in the day. But people don't necessarily need private airplanes. So it's interesting to figure out, how do you get them to say, yes, I need what it is that you're selling? And at the end of the day, what I do is I sell dreams, I sell time, I give people access to do the things that they otherwise perhaps may not have had the opportunity to do, and have a whole lot of fun doing it. I've been really lucky in my business. I've been able to help a lot of folks do this at a relatively young age. And this is one of my favorite quotes by Einstein. I have no special talent, I'm just passionately curious. And frankly, that's sort of how I reflect on myself. In fact, as a kid, my favorite cartoon was Curious George. I like to think I'm a little bit Curious Cyrus. I kind of look like a monkey when I was a kid. So, part of starting this reflection process requires a high level of self-awareness. While I've sold a couple $1 billion worth of airplanes, I'm actually not a very good salesman. I had to write all the sales books. I don't do the whole follow-up system things that they teach you in sales books. I'm actually not a very good negotiator. All the key tenets that they say that you need to be a good salesperson, I don't actually have. But I'm really good at developing relationships. I'm really good at curating experiences and giving people moments that they really latch onto. I was in the Peloton talk. How many of you heard the Peloton talk? You know, they were talking about those critical moments in the customer life cycle when they delivered the bike to the house. Man, totally applicable to our business. Because how we started our business was being consultants on the day people took delivery of their airplanes, and we were the white glove guys. They ensured they had a really beautiful experience, and we got that relationship for the life of the customer's ownership experience. And so that's a huge part of one of the lessons I've taken away, is understanding those key moments, those delivery days
that your customer interacts with your company and you personally, and how you show up for it makes a big impact. So going through that, I started to ask some questions about why. Why have we been successful? How is it that we've been able to develop relationships with 5 of the top 10 wealthiest people in the world? So I had to ask the question, what is a relationship? When I first started thinking about what a relationship was, I assumed that you had person A and person B, and between them there was a bond. Kind of makes a lot of sense, right? But as I spent some time thinking about it, I said, no, that's not right, actually. It's a different relationship. It's more something like person A, person B, and person B has a relationship with A that is totally different and unrelated to the other relationship from A to B. This was my ta-da moment. When I assumed that my relationship to somebody had anything to do with their relationship to me, I realized that's not right. And so I took that to the next level. I said, if that's the case, what are the different types of relationships you can have? So start with no relationship at all. I like to use the example of a sub-Saharan African tribesman and somebody from a tribesman in South America. They're not connected by Facebook, internet, email, telephone. The only thing they have in common is that they're 2 human beings. There is no relationship whatsoever. Then the co-attraction relationship, the relationship between a mother and a child, or 2 lovers, where there's strong pull between the 2. The asymmetric relationship. This is reminiscent of my relationship with Donna in 5th grade. I loved her. I wanted her. She wanted nothing to do with me. Wouldn't touch me with a 5-foot pole. So in this case, an asymmetric relationship where I had strong relationship strength to her, but her relationship back to me was not the same. And then the adversary relationship. That between 2 fighters or competitors in the business world. Obvious, you don't have mutual interest aligned. So in general, these are really the 4 different types of relationships you can really have. Now the question is this it? Or can it change over time? Or how does it change over time? So let's take a real relationship. Let's take Erica and Thomas. Eric and Thomas are newlyweds. And we're going to take a little walk down memory lane about their relationship. So the history of their marriage and relationship starts at the very beginning. And assume that we have something called relationship strength, where it's quantifiable from 0 to 10. 10's high, 0 is low. Day 1, they meet, there's no relationship at all. But as time goes on, they kind of start to like each other, and the relationship goes up. But they're not the same, but they're similar in this case. They get married. And you can see that it's a strong co-attraction relationship. So what's a familiar story? People get married, life settles in, work life gets in the way, things change. In this case, the wife feels underappreciated, mentions her love for horses, stressed out about the child getting into preschool, husband's fat, dumb, and happy. He's living his life, bringing home the bacon. He feels like everything is going just good because he's delivering on what he said he'd do, which was, in this particular case, delivering for the family. And so he thinks that the relationship strength is strong and it's good, but at the same time, his counterparty here is not feeling that way. So as some time goes on, the relationship degrades. And ultimately, they go into a divorce. What's fascinating is we started off this relationship with no relationship at all to a strong co-attraction relationship to, in some ways, an asymmetric relationship into an adversarial relationship. Isn't that fascinating to think you go from nothing to as close as you possibly can to as diametrically opposed as you possibly can, all through a time history plot? Think about the closest relationships you have in your life. Think about what you think their relationship strength to you is versus what your relationship strength to them is, to your parents, to your coworkers, to your boss, your investors, so on and so forth. So this presumption of how I feel about you is how you feel about me was one of the things that was stuck in my head for quite a while that this sort of thinking changed my perspective on. So on to the next chapter. My background's in aerospace engineering, and it's easy for me to look at a problem and go into that of an engineer. So I said, why don't I come up with a mathematical model to model relationships? My girlfriend at the time said, "You're an idiot. Don't do that." But I still did it anyways. So, but I'm not going to go into equations. I'll go into just the high level on it. So I believe there's two fundamental inputs for a relationship. Physical interactions plus non-physical interactions. So I consider these to be the two arenas. The physical space and the non-physical space. And within each one of these arenas, we have players, and we've got games that are going on that are affecting how the crowd reacts to the game that's being played. And then within these two arenas, how is it that we're adding value to the counterparty, and how is it that we're connecting? And lastly, what are the X factors? What are the non-linear step function things in a relationship that can shift it significantly one way or the other? So let's dive into that a little bit more. Ways to add value. This is one of my favorite topics. If we could figure out how we add value to one another, how we add value to our customers' lives, to our coworkers' lives, to our parents' lives, to our lovers' lives, and be really thoughtful about understanding what it is they value, we'd have a much happier world, as opposed to just assuming that what they value is what you value. So here's a list of things that I'm sure there's more, but the ones that generally are accepted that things we value. One, monetary. Well, we all more or less value our jobs because it brings us some sort of wealth. Providing physical safety. If somebody's walking down the street in a rainstorm and you see them and they're stuck and you open the door and say, "Come in," you've added a tremendous amount of value to that person's life that day, and you will probably stay in their mind for a really, really long time. It's fascinating, the concept of physical safety and giving somebody some level of care and how that can impact a relationship. Emotional comfort when somebody's not feeling good and giving them that love. Spiritual guidance. Knowledge given and put into action. This is the value that's received by a mentor. Most great mentors aren't doing it for you. They're doing it for them. They get value out of taking their experience and knowledge to their mentees and seeing it put into action and then growth being generated. And vice versa. For a mentee, they're not doing it for the mentor. They're doing it because they want to get knowledge and put it to action. So those two are very closely aligned. If you have a mentor in your life, you want to make them feel good, listen to what they say and put it into action, if they really are a mentor and somebody you trust. Connecting to another value adder. That's what's happening here. The true team is putting together all of you into a room, all these great speakers, these great venues. You've curated a really amazing experience. We're allowing you to get value added to your life and to your businesses. Creating memories that are unique. That's what my business is all about, is being able to take time machines and go in amazing places around the world and give memories that will stick with them for the rest of our lives. Health. It's amazing that if somebody gives you a piece of health advice, that all of a sudden you are able to run 2 minutes faster on a mile, or you shed 10, 15 pounds you haven't been able to achieve, or they sent you to a doctor that maybe helped you diagnose something that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Boom, immediately you've got a significant amount of value added to your life. Helping somebody overcome a fear, giving them love, appreciation, saving time, and laughter. Appreciation. Number one reason people leave a company typically is because they feel underappreciated. And the last one, laughter, is really interesting. Almost everybody in the room has a friend that doesn't do anything else on this list, but is funny as hell, is dumb as a bag of rocks, but makes you laugh. That's interesting. So laughter is a really interesting way that we can add value to others. That's one side of the equation. The other side is how we connect. And in this world, how we connect, man, what an interesting thing to really wrap your head around. The medium of connection isn't as important right now, but the things that we're connecting about, places we travel to, politics, your race, your hardships, your fears, your wins, ethnicity, passions, family, sports, all these topics that if you can find what somebody really values and what they want to connect upon, you can really have an opportunity to grow relationship strength. And the last one up there is touch. Touch is one of the most powerful tools for connecting. Some people don't like to be touched, and it's usually related to the fact that their parents didn't touch them when they were younger, hold them close. But when a family is love, there's a lot of touch. Those that receive touch in that capacity, you can have a big impact in terms of how you connect with them. So then the X factors. So there's X factors that can have a nonlinear step function sort of effect on relationship strength. I'm sure there's more, but here's a few that we've come up with. Something called the royalty effect. If the British royal family were to walk into the room, just about everybody would say, hey, I kind of want to hang out with the British royal family. They may not have a whole lot of interest and desire hanging out with you, because everybody wants to hang out with them. But because of this concept of their power and their prominence in society, all of a sudden you've got this one-sided sort of royalty effect. Then there's the hero effect. Our former governor. This guy's an incredible human being. If you think about what Arnold did, I mean, he was an immigrant from Austria, Mr. Olympian, came to the United States, became the biggest actor of our time, at least of his time as an actor, then became the governor of the 5th largest economy in the world. This guy's a freaking rock star. I want to be in his sphere of influence because I respect what he's done, and I'm hoping just a little bit of it rubs off on me. And last but not least, the sex effect. It's incredible. Some of the smartest intellectual human beings on the face of the earth have ruined their lives because of the power of the sex effect. And it's something that we all need to be aware of. It's a very powerful tool. My business is very sexy, and we use it in that sense. And many of your businesses, I'm sure, are very sexy. But there's also a human component and a business component. If we know how to manipulate in the right way, we can generate this affinity and X factor to our relationships. Chapter 3. My opinion, the single most powerful relationship tool we have, laying underneath your ribs, it's your heart. There's some really interesting science I want to share with you guys that I've spent a lot of time researching that has really affected me in some incredible ways and has affected my team and my individual performance as a salesperson. Our bodies are giant circuit boards. The way I move my toes is I'm sending an electrical signal through all sorts of stuff to eventually get down to my toes, and my toes are moving. Our hearts are effectively giant batteries. If you were to measure the electromagnetic field of our body, it's meaningful. There's tools, and I have one at home where you can measure the electromagnetic field, and what's fascinating is the electromagnetic field of your heart is 1,000 times that of your brain. You know there's 90% more information going from your heart to your brain than from your brain to your heart? Not only that, your heart has a totally independent memory system from your brain. There's very similar cells that are found in the brain on the outside of the heart. If you think about a lost loved one, you feel it here. You think about that tough math problem you did in high school, you might feel it up here. So being aware of the differentiation between the fact that the heart has got some really interesting electromagnetic capability, that the heart has a memory, and that your body listens to your heart a lot, being that there's 90% more information going from your heart to your brain than from your brain to your heart, it's something worth spending some time studying. This is a really interesting graph. There's an organization called the Heart Math Institute that's pretty much all they do is study this stuff. And they did some research as it relates to heart rate variability, and something called the impulse that's coming out of the body, power spectral density, and different emotions. So here's a graph of somebody that's frustrated and a time history plot of their heart. You can see it's pretty erratic, and it goes through this up and down cycle. They asked them to think about something that frustrates you. And then they asked them to shift to appreciation. And you see a pretty striking change in what's happening with the heart. Let's take this to another level. On the left-hand side is what we just saw. It's heart rate and heart rate variability as a function of time. On the right-hand side is something called power spectral density. How I want you to think about power spectral density is think about our bodies are emitting frequencies as it relates to from an EMF perspective. And those ticks on the bottom, consider them to be keys on a piano. Okay? And how tall they are is how loud the noise is coming out of that key. So the sound you're hearing on the one on the right is something like blam. That's the sound that's effectively being emitted from the body when somebody's angry. Here's relaxation. So a very different time history plot as it relates to the heart. But the power spectral density, what's being emitted from the body, the sound that you're creating through that sort of thinking, is really not that different than being angry. It's maybe blank, it's a little bit louder, and it's got a few extra keys. But from an order of magnitude perspective, it's about as loud, and it's about as, maybe a few more extra notes, but not that different. This is probably the coolest slide in this entire presentation. This right here. Appreciation. So we're talking almost an order of magnitude more output from the body at a very, very, very specific, focused frequency when you are being appreciative. What does that sound like? Bing! Versus blank. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody that's really appreciative to be with you, and you can feel a difference? Even if you close your eyes, you can feel a difference. Have you ever laid with a significant other, and you know they're frustrated, and you haven't even said a word? Or vice versa? It's about what's being emitted from the body. It has to do with what you're thinking and what the heart is sending out. How many of you guys have heard of the Emoto Experiments? Cool. This is really neat stuff. So Dr. Emoto did an experiment where he took water and he exposed water molecules to different sounds, different music, and different words said over time. And he let them sit for a while, and then he came back and he looked at them under a microscope. Pretty self-explanatory. Heavy metal, you make me sick, I kill you. Adolf Hitler, thank you, love and appreciation, Mother Teresa. You can look this all up. It's all over the web. It's really not all that different from what I just shared with you. It has to do with what is it that's being emitted and how it's affecting water. And guess what? We have a lot of water in our bodies. And so living a life full of appreciation can have actual physical effect on your body by virtue of your molecular makeup. So your body is not just a transmitter. Your heart is not just a transmitter. It is also a receiver. You walk into a room and somebody's just got weird energy and you don't want to be around them. Okay, you're receiving. That's not just you got a funny feeling. You're actually processing information. And vice versa. If you go into a meeting and you go in wanting something, the chances of you getting what you want are significantly lower if you go in being appreciative that you've got a chance to be at that meeting. I'm sure many of you have experienced something like that. Have you had somebody come to you, they want something, versus, how you doing? I'm just really happy to be with you right now. Can you affect a relationship? Yeah, but at the same time, you're being appreciative. You're making the world a better place. People want to be around you. You're going to be healthier. So what's fascinating about this concept of you being a transmitter and being a receiver is that it has to do with how far you are. So if you measure this output of the body, it decays at 1 over the square root. So if you're very, very close, it's really strong. And if you're about that far away, it's really not that noticeable. So you think about in a business environment, how you set a table and how you meet and how you share space with somebody can have a lot of impact in what information you're sending, what information you're receiving, and how you can play the room, if you will. So I learned this in the cockpit. I started my flying career as a flight instructor, sitting 6 inches away from people, and realized quickly that I had an ability to read their energy easily. It didn't take much work. And I learned if I provided a certain space and environment to shift their energy, I could get them to do what I wanted them to do, which was not kill me, ultimately. Or make them buy a $20 million airplane. Okay. So, going back to my thesis about the math of relationships, we have 2 arenas. We've got this physical space arena, and we have players in that arena that are fighting a certain fight. And then we've got the non-physical arena. Let me go back there real quick, which is email, text, phone, books, video, where there is none of this energy exchange. If you talk about a business deal and you're emailing terms, versus actually sitting face to face, you have an ability to have a major impact in terms of how those terms are going to be received by virtue of coming to that space with love and appreciation and being thankful to have an opportunity to even be there. And what's scary or a challenge or an opportunity is that our world is shifting to this non-physical space. So at the end of this, for all you tech entrepreneurs, I'd love for you to figure out a way for us to get this to transmit over the internet one way, shape, or form. Okay, so we talked about the physical interaction, the non-physical interactions, adding value, connecting. What's the most intimate experience you can share with someone? Wild guess. Boom. Sex, right? You are as physically close to the counterpart as you can possibly be. Your hearts are just like this. And what's fascinating in this space, if somebody comes into it without a heart of appreciation, the counterparty knows right away. Even though the mechanics are exactly the same from one experience to the next, a different emission of the body can completely alter the experience. The next chapter, authority gradient. Authority gradient is probably one of the most interesting topics in aviation safety, and probably one of the most interesting topics as it relates to retaining customers, independent of it being in aviation or not. I'll tell you why. Southeast Asia has been notorious for one of the most dangerous places to fly in airliners. And the reason is a cultural issue as it relates to somebody that's more senior to you as a captain and co-pilot and wanting them to save face and not wanting to embarrass them. So that means that a very senior captain's in the cockpit with a very junior co-pilot, and the junior co-pilot is watching the captain do something bad. But you know what? My culture says I do not critique my elders, and I'm not going to say anything. He continues to watch him do something bad. He continues. That airplane crashes into the side of a mountain. There are more cases of that happening than you would believe, particularly in Southeast Asia. So the accident investigators started to realize that's what was happening. And this concept of authority gradient was made up of a lot of different factors. It had to do with gender, it had to do with experience, it had to do with age, so on and so forth. And all these little factors would affect how egalitarian the cockpit was. In the Western society, we didn't really have this problem. So they went through a lot of time and energy to retrain those crews. And as a result, it's gotten a lot more safe in Southeast Asia to fly on airliners. So what's interesting is you can actually create an authority gradient in your business, and you can create an authority gradient in your relationships if you think about what we talked about already as it relates to relationship strength. If you're a service provider and I'm a consumer, you're already at a disadvantage. Why? Because I've got something, theoretically money or relationships or time, energy, whatever it may be, that you as a service provider somehow want to take advantage of. So right off the bat, the authority gradient is skewed. So in my business, I've got to deal with that all the time. I got people that don't necessarily jump at the opportunity to buy an airplane, and I've got to somehow shift that authority gradient so that they want to do it. That I don't have to ask them to do it. And the way I personally do it, and we've done it in some ways using leverage through how our marketing is done, so forth, is in the cockpit. I don't sell. Actually, I told you I'm a very, very bad salesman, but I teach. This was this morning. I flew up here from Los Angeles in an Embraer Phenom 300 with a customer, and we didn't talk about a transaction one bit. All we did was I taught him. I wanted to add value to him. I wanted him to feel more safe. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to learn and connect about his life experiences and what it was that really got him fired up. I tried to be as nice as possible, and I tried to be interesting. I tried to share about my life and try to get him to share about his life. By the end of that flight, it shifted. The authority gradient had gone to the point where we were no longer service provider customer. We were buddies. We were pals. I had something that he wanted. He wanted my background. He wanted my knowledge that I can enrich his life. And that is applicable to every single business here in making your company shift the authority gradient with the consumer. This happens to be just one person, but you can do it through publication. You can do it by virtue of the way you interact with your customers through web or whatever it may be. How many of you have seen the movie Into the Wild? One of my favorite movies. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's about a young man, a true story, who grew up on the East Coast, was very successful, came from an affluent family, got into, I believe, an Ivy League school, and said, you know what? I don't want it. He gave it all up, got in a car, and he just drove west. And it's a really beautiful story of a young man kind of finding himself. Ultimately ends up in Alaska, and he ends up living in this bus. And he ate a bad berry and died. And they found his journal, and they made a movie about it. And one of the last scenes of the movie is one of the last things he wrote in his book, which was, happiness is only real when shared. And it's fascinating that it took him this entire journey to go through and living in Alaska by himself in a van, just about to die, and he realized he figured it out. That his life's joy really came from when he shared it with others, as he lay by himself, sick and poisoned. So, with that, I go back to the slide before it. It says, be interesting and share. So share your life, but share something that people will be interested in. And so I've come up with a few rules of interesting. 1, live an interesting life. It's pretty simple. Take risks and do hard things. Many of you are at startups. That's pretty interesting. I want to hear about that. And you're probably doing some pretty hard stuff with some pretty small teams, with big challenges and expectations from your investors and your family and your friends and your Facebook friends, whatever it may be. Be curious. Being curious is a practice. It's not something you can just let sit by the side. If you have a capacity to foster curiosity with yourself, with your teammates, with your family and your friends, interesting things happen. Because you start to ask questions and you start to learn. You learn about yourself. Living and sharing about your interesting life will inspire others. I want to say that again. Living and sharing an interesting life will inspire others. And if you can inspire others, you may have an opportunity to learn what they value and what their dreams are. And if you learn what they value and you learn what their dreams are, you might have an opportunity to help them by providing value through what you do and by helping them achieve their dreams. And by virtue of doing that, your relationship strength may skyrocket. And it may have nothing to do with how you make money as a business. If you go back to that list of value-add components and connectivity components, that's what the key is figuring it out. What do your customers really want? What do your family members really want? What do your friends really want, your lovers? And in my opinion, I believe it's stupid to be humble. I'll say it again. I think it's stupid to be humble. Every one of us should be proud. And I believe most people are actually very poor storytellers about their really interesting lives because they're afraid of being boastful. But I think it's an art to learn how to share about yourself because you actually, every person here has had a really interesting life, even if they think they haven't. The number of folks that I've spoken to after these talks and say, no, I haven't had an interesting life, it takes me about 5 questions and I get into a nugget. I'm like, you need to wear that on your shoulder wherever you go and tell people about it because that's really fucking interesting. So, we're going to share. So let's practice. What we're going to do is turn to the person next to you and share about 2 interesting things that are happening in your life right now. Go. All right, so I want you to recognize what happened to the room. Did you feel what happened? If you looked around, and it's my favorite thing to do when giving this talk is looking around and seeing what happens to people's mouths. Every single person in this room was smiling. Because one of 2 things was happening. You were either talking about something that was really interesting to you, and you were smiling and causing your counterparty to smile, or they found it interesting and they were smiling. So one of my favorite questions to ask, and it doesn't matter if it's the first time I've met someone or I saw them yesterday, is tell me about what's interesting happening in your life right now. What they said yesterday has nothing to do with what they're going to say today. Somebody share something interesting you heard. There was a lot of interesting conversations going on. Come on, yes.
Irene here is teaching a 2-year-old how to use the potty.
That's interesting, right? We were all there at one point. I still haven't learned. You can teach me later. Yes?
My two friends here are graduating from grad school tomorrow. Friday.
That is freaking cool. Congratulations. Round of applause. Yes, sir.
Learned that there might be a proposal coming in a relationship.
Yeah, baby. Woo! Cool. What else? Come on. We need a few more. Yes.
I learned that he's taking a trip to Croatia on a sailboat, that he does not have to work at all.
Can I come? Cool. Awesome. One more. Yes, sir.
Someone from my group recently turned 30 and got married and was planning out the future of his life.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and he's training for the Ironman at the same time.
Kick ass. Awesome. Which one? Which Ironman?
Santa Rosa.
Santa Rosa. Very cool. Okay. So, sort of the takeaways from that is the energy increase of your counterparty when asking them what's interesting in their life. Most of the times we're asking the question of, how are you doing? Or how was work? How was your day? You're asking for them to tell you what you want to know about a very specific thing. But if you ask what's interesting in your life, there is no direction on how that's going to come out. And it may be something that's not so good, but they're going to be very real about it. And I've learned more from my customers and figuring out how I can add value to their life by virtue of asking that question than any other question I can ask them. And it has nothing to do with selling airplanes. So as a business operator, as a friend, as a son, a daughter, a brother, a mother, those that are important to you, ask the question, what's interesting to your counterparty? So part of what I do is I try to be interesting by living an interesting life, by sharing about it, by asking questions that get people to tell me what's interesting to them. So I'm going to practice a little bit with you guys because I like doing it and it makes me smile and hopefully it makes you smile too. My family is from Iran. They left in 1979 during the revolution. My father was nearly hung and my mom was nearly shot. Thankfully, they got out and they came to this amazing freaking country called America, the home of immigrants that go out to pursue a better life. They moved to the most natural place that you can move to as immigrants from Iran, which is New Orleans. I'm one of 2 Persian Cajuns you will ever meet in your life, and I can make an incredible baklava jambalaya. Since I was a small child, I loved airplanes. I loved everything to do with airplanes. You could not peel me away from a book or a side of a plane, whatever it may be. It fired me up. When I was 7 years old, our family moved to Los Angeles, where I grew up most of my life. In school, I went to Catholic schools, and most of them were white Catholic schools, and I'm neither white nor Catholic. And I experienced racism and prejudice, and I'll tell you, it was one of the most difficult things I'd ever gone through. And I'm so grateful to have gone through it, because it made me understand what is probably the most degrading thing of our culture that we have an opportunity to fix, and I think we're doing it now because it's becoming part of the conversation. But it hurt me, and it hurt me bad, but it made me stronger. I sold an airplane at 16. I got my license at 17. I was one of the 2 youngest commercial pilot and flight instructors on my 18th birthday and became an airline transport pilot at age 23. Aviation has been my life, and it will continue to be my life. Went to university at Purdue, studied aerospace engineering with a dream and passion of becoming an astronaut. I thought that would be pretty cool. But 9/11 happened, things changed, my whole trajectory changed a bit. And then while I was there, I had an incredible fear of public speaking. I could not speak in front of people at all without my legs shaking, without sweating, without having a freaking nervous breakdown. And so I didn't like that I had that fear. So that's part of the reason I'm here right now, is I'm still working on it with you guys. And I love it. And I love public speaking now as a result. Out of school, I got my dream job working for a company called Eclipse Aviation. I had the incredible privilege of developing a really cool new technology, first new fire suppression system certified for aviation in over 50 years. It was a kick-ass time. Unfortunately, while I was there, I had a really traumatic experience, and I considered suicide. And that was a really pivotal experience in my life that I'm really grateful for to have gotten through, but again, made me stronger. 11 years ago now, I co-founded jetAVIVA with my best friend from childhood. We met when we were 11 years old, and we were partners starting from 11 years old. We achieved one of our dreams by buying an aerobatic airplane. I was a competitive aerobatic pilot. I got inspired by this by watching Tom Cruise when I was a little kid, flying one of these airplanes at Santa Monica Airport, and of course, Top Gun, which is why I got into flying, by the way. This is a hazardous sport, and I came really, really close to dying in an inverted flat spin. Actually, the thing that killed Goose in Top Gun, that almost exact same thing happened to me. And I lost a bunch of buddies. So after many years and a really hard decision, decided to give up my aerobatic flying. I still get to fly some cool stuff. I wanted to also be an airline pilot, but business got in the way. So I said, I'm not going to let business get in the way. So I went to Boeing, and I still got myself trained in a Boeing 747 jet, which is freaking cool. I recommend it for everybody if you ever get a chance to do it. Kind of going through some of these pivotal experiences in my life, said, hey, I better start asking questions about the finality of my life. And going back to our slogan of life is short, fly jet, because you may not be able to do it one day. And you want to make sure you get it all in while you can. Remember I said I want to go be an astronaut? Well, the typical path didn't work out, but I am signed up to go through Virgin Galactic, if and ever, whenever they get going into space in the next couple of years. Going back to that finality of life, I realized I won't have my parents forever. Thankfully, they're still around, so I take them with me wherever, whenever I can. And I grew up with a lot of resentment from my parents, like many have growing up, and this is a cornerstone of my life right now, is sharing as much time and beautiful experience with them as I can. I grew up as a really fat kid, really fat. And I remember watching on NBC the Iron Man, and I said, there's no way I could possibly be able to do that. And a couple years ago, I did the Iron Man Coeur d'Alene. So when is your race? End of July. Awesome. Done $5 billion in sales, number one in the world what we do. We just raised $20 million in equity. I like to do yoga and stupid party tricks wherever I can. Just recently skied with the U.S. ski team. Trained with Conor McGregor's top trainer. John came to our 10-year company anniversary where we did set a world record for a number of private jets flying in formation together. This upcoming year, we'll be setting the round the world record in a single pilot jet, and soon to be getting a tattoo, which I'm really excited about. Two other really interesting things, I'm not done yet, is I love bears, so I spent an entire day with a grizzly bear out in Moab, which was a lot of fun, and I just got back from Poland where I did a 7-day super cold exposure training course with Wim Hof. Did a climb up the tallest mountain in Poland in minus 20 degrees and nothing but my shorts. It's freaking awesome, yeah. What's that? No, it's just like my bear hat. I like bears. So, anyways, hey, if you watched me tell that story, even during the tough stuff, I was smiling. And the reason I was smiling is because I like talking about it. Because there are things that define who I am. Now, the key is telling the story in a way that you're not arrogant or you're cocky, but that you're proud about your life and you're sharing about your life, because there may have been something in that story that resonated with someone that say, hey, he went through something that I may want to do or has gone through, and then we might have an opportunity to connect. And the only way that might happen is if I share about my experiences, just in the same way you all share with each other. So, the finale. Relationships have two parts. They have an amplitude, they have a magnitude, and they are completely independent and time-dependent. Relationships form the two arenas that we talked about, the physical space, the non-physical space, and they're defined by how you're adding value to your counterparty and how you're connecting and being aware of what those X factors are. It's my opinion that the heart is by far the most powerful sales tool any of us have, because our heart knows the truth. And when you're there to love and give appreciation, people know it, and they will listen to you without you even having to open your mouth. Create opportunities where you can quickly grow relationship strength. Today, I got to be 6 inches away from my customer, give him an awesome experience where all we focused on was relationship strength. It didn't talk about business at all. Now my door has been opened up, and when I do want to talk business, I can flow in and out just like anybody else, or better than anybody else, frankly. Shift the authority gradient. Be aware of the authority gradient. By virtue of doing these things where you're adding value in their life in a way that perhaps others can't do. Be interesting, because it's interesting to be interesting. It's fun to be interesting. Take risks. Do cool shit. When you're interesting, people will become interested in you, and you may learn what it is that's interesting to them. and may give you a window to help them. Stupid to be humble. You're robbing others from the opportunity to be inspired by you and your life. And if you're the best, tell me why, because I want to know. And so do they. Thank you so much. So, in all seriousness, I'm actually really interested about how, and I had this chat with John back in Wyoming a couple months ago. If you believe in some of the stuff I've said here about relationship strength and our transmission of energy, I mean, how we communicate with individuals, and you think there might be a business or an idea around it, I want to hear about it. Furthermore, if you agree or disagree with any of the things I've said, I want to hear about it, either in person or over the phone or over email, and how this sort of topic can continue to evolve, because this is what I'm doing for fun. No other interest in it other than sharing my story and perhaps getting it better and helping others. So with that, we've got a few minutes. I don't know if any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
One question. In being able to build a relationship, you want to be able to add value to that relationship. That's a factor in strengthening that relationship. What suggestions do you have for understanding what a person needs to be able to add value to that relationship?
Well, first, you have to have the opportunity to have a conversation with them, right? So you've got to create the arena where they'll walk in. So that's sort of unrelated to what you're doing with them one-on-one. That's sort of the foundational work. I think being a really good question asker is a really undervalued skill, and I think an under-taught skill in school, right? But it goes back to that concept of curiosity and practicing curiosity. Because if you're curious in your own life and you start to build a body of knowledge of things, I went car shopping with a friend, and we're driving around while this guy's talking about selling the whole time. And we didn't care at all about him selling. We just wanted to see if we liked the car and didn't want to hear his pitch. But then all of a sudden he went on this tangent talking about his love for artisan coffee and had this incredible body of knowledge around it. And I found it fascinating. And we spent the entire time talking about that. And by the end of the time, my relationship strength with him had shifted significantly. So, being committed in learning and creating body of knowledge, whatever it may be that's interesting to you, and then if you think it might be interesting to them, give them a little tickle so that it comes out and see if they go down the pathway. So that's that, and then you actually have to be able to do something. So that's building skill sets and relationships and funding or whatever it might be. Somebody once said you can give somebody your time, you can give them your money, you can give them your network, you can give them your energy. Those are the 4 things we really have. So figuring out what people need and giving them one of those 4 things. Yes?
Have you had a situation where you've asked a lot of open-ended questions, but the person isn't really responding or just isn't giving you a hard time, not really giving you stories? How do you,
Totally. Yeah.
What's that experience been like for you, or just what do you do with that?
Yeah, most of the girls I wanted to date, that was how it... No. Yeah, I mean, like if you're a salesperson in sales, I mean, you get used to rejection all the time, right? Very small percent. I mean, for what I do, like in the world, there's maybe a couple thousand people that are even in the space of being able to do what we, how we service. So even getting to that point, like rejection left and right just because they don't have a need or you're not the right fit or whatever it might be. So, going back to another sort of fundamental that I believe is really important for entrepreneurs is grit, right? No matter how many times you fail, continue to get up and do it again. So is figuring out another angle, another flank to come in to ask a question to get some information and learning from those failures. Any more questions? Yes?
As you mentioned, the culture of work is totally changing and remote work is becoming more and more popular. Have you seen any tools out there that are trying to solve the problem that you're exactly seeing? Like if you're working with a team who's based all over the world and you need to communicate, you need to collaborate. Have you seen anyone kind of cross that border and that emotional connection with team members or people you're trying to sell to?
Really great question.
Can you repeat the question?
The question, go.
I'm curious, because the culture of work is changing, there are more and more companies working remotely and teams spread out across the world. Are there any tools out there that he's seen, like bridge that gap and create the emotional effect virtually.
Yeah. I failed at this magnificently in my own business. We have people all over. We actually started in a kind of a nuclear office where everybody was together. And I'm dealing with a lot of the issues as a result of that from a cultural perspective in our business. In fact, I think IBM just, is it 6,000 jobs? They said you're either moving to the mothership or you're fired. I think it has a lot to do with this sort of stuff. Honeywell just went through a very similar sort of shift. Didn't Yahoo also have a similar sort of? So I think the world kind of went, oh, this is super awesome. And then, oh my God, it's so hard to really communicate and sell. And selling isn't about selling a product, it's selling an idea. And it's hard to do if you don't necessarily have that physical connection. So I put a big premium on physical proximity, much more so now than I did before, actually. But there's, frankly, I mean, you guys are the tech folks, in terms of the products, Slack and Facebook for Business. I think Facebook for Business is really interesting. We're starting to implement it now, and I'm actually starting to feel a little bit more sort of connectivity with folks in that context. And I think ultimately that's what Facebook is trying to do, is connect humanity in a way that feels human and not fake news, whatever the topic du jour is today. Yes, ma'am.
In your opinion, do you think you could get a sense of a person's energy through technology, whether it would be over text or email, and how? How do you create good energy through technology, even texting?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in this because I think whoever figures this out will have $1 trillion company. Because what we're effectively discussing is how do you actually communicate empathy for all of humanity without actually having to physically be there. So if I could feel what's happening in Syria right now, I'd probably have a different amount of my time spent towards that. I imagine those around us would have a different feeling, right? If you're watching the screen and you're actually getting to feel what the mother is feeling, like that would shake us to our core versus just getting this repeat vision image, just 2D thing. So I do think this is the next level of, from a technological perspective, a moonshot for humanity to be able to communicate over distances. And there's ways to do this. All the things I told you about, I'm emitting, and it can be measured. And if it can be measured, it can theoretically be captured, transmitted, and theoretically projected elsewhere. So my dream case is this Fitbit. Any Fitbit people in the room? There's one, okay. Fitbit, right? It receives this information from me, and it's transmitting it to John across the room through some sort of transmitter on the other side. Because at the end of the day, it's just basic electrical engineering sort of stuff, physics. At least that's my belief. If anybody has any ideas how to do that, I'd be an investor.
Well, I was going to say, if someone figures out how to capture that data, it would just be a measuring the waves that are coming out.
That would be my belief. I think so.
But there is an application right now for VR. I know that Google was doing an experiment with children in like kindergarten and first grade where they create the Google Cardboard, and that they put them in a landfill so they could see like what the effect of the Earth is, or what the impact to the Earth is, and develop empathy for just the planet. And so I think VR will be a great application for empathy, especially if they can integrate it with that as well.
Yeah, that is sort of energetic communication. Totally agree. I'm being told that my time is up. People, thanks so much for your time. I'm really appreciative.